Hello, and welcome to the Road to Autonomy Podcast. I am your host, Grayson Brulte. The Road to Autonomy Podcast is brought to you in part by Florida Internet and Television. It's time to cut the tax on tech. Hello, and welcome to the Road to Autonomy. I'm your host, Grayson Brulte. On today's episode, we're absolutely honored to have Pippa Malmgren, former presidential advisor, economist, best-selling author, and policy analyst. Welcome to the podcast, Pippa.
Oh, thank you for having me. I'm psyched.
I'm super excited to have you here, and I want to go back and talk about your father for a second here, because your father, Mr. Malmgren, was a senior advisor to 4 consecutive U.S. presidents, beginning with John F. Kennedy and concluding with Gerald Ford. How was your father able to command the respect of both the Democrats and the Republicans? Because it's impressive.
Yeah, it is. It was a little easier in those days because you could be an expert technocrat and serve both sides. But really, it was about trust. And my dad taught me a lot about how very important it is to have trusted relationships, even with people who are your opponents. And when I got to the White House, when I was working for President George W. Bush, I reached out to my counterpart who'd been working for Bill Clinton. And she was like, "Why are you calling me and taking me to lunch?" And I said, "Because look, we may have different views, but at some point we're going to have an emergency and it's going to take both sides to fix the problem. And I need your phone number now and to know you now." And I don't know, those days are gone, sadly.
I don't know if they're gone forever, because at some point, bipartisanship has to come back. You have to work with both sides of the aisle. You have to develop trust in relationships. When do we get there, do you think?
You know, I've had so many conversations with like the great and the good of Congress about this. I remember talking to Lee Hamilton once, who's trusted by both sides completely. And he felt it was just a matter of personal leadership. Somebody would step up to that plate and say, "This is how we're going to do it." By the way, in the old days, Bob Strauss and Howard Baker, right, the head of the Democrat and the Republican parties, they were best friends, and they had a poker game every Friday night at their house, and they would solve all these problems over drinks and knocking back whiskey. And, in a way, you can't solve these things if you don't even just go for a drink with these folks. And so we got to get more humanity back into it before we can get someone standing up and saying bipartisanship is how it should be done. And it's what every poll shows the American public wants.
And you're right. And when we get to a post-COVID world, like myself, you've done more business deals in a bar or a dinner with somebody when you get to know them and you have a great time. And I'm sure during your time in the George W. Bush White House as special assistant to the president on economic policy on the National Economic Council, you developed a lot of relationships there. What was that experience like? And were you reaching to, you mentioned, to your friend in the Clinton administration, to other sides of the aisle to try and get a really good, well-rounded perspective on economic policy?
Absolutely. Well, and call me old-fashioned, but my view was, you're not elected to just represent one side. You're elected to represent the American public. And that means you need to understand a whole lot of different views. And just because the other side has a view doesn't mean it's incorrect. It might be useful to incorporate into the law or make some provision for. And yeah, anyway, I always had to talk to everybody policy, and people used to be amazed. They're like, "You answer your own phone and you meet with everyone." I'm like, "Yeah, because that's the job." So I don't know. I think that is the job. And I worked for Ronald Reagan as well. I was an intern in the Reagan White House. That's like dating me, isn't it? That's probably bad. I shouldn't admit to that. But at any rate, and those days were bipartisan as well. Those guys used to all get together. And I maybe there's something that it contributes to that. And that's the Freedom of Information Act, which is ironic because, of course, we all support the Freedom of Information Act, right? Who doesn't? But if you look at it really clearly, and if you work in the White House, if you have more than 2 people meeting on a live public policy issue, you must have a lawyer present because of FOIA. And I think that's partly why nobody goes drinking anymore, because legally you can't unless you have a lawyer present.
Wow. So it's bureaucracy at its finest.
Yeah, it's actually the bureaucracy. The rules that were meant to make it better are actually contributing to making it worse now.
We have a new president coming in this week here in the United States. It's placing a lot of geopolitical issues and economic issues across the board. What advice would you have for that President Biden and that incoming team, especially on economic policy? Because it's going to get really dicey unless the right decisions are made for the benefit of all society, not just for segments of society.
Yeah, well, that begins with your view about what happens to the economy post-COVID, or how long does it take to get through COVID. And I'm a bit of an outlier, right? Like most economists who tend to be a pretty downbeat group of people by nature, most of them will tell you it's recession, depression, and by the way, you're going to lose your job to automation. And it's just all dark stuff. I see something very different, which is we have a record amount of capital in the world economy. It's been injected by every government, much more cash than the financial crisis. And now it's looking for a home. And because of the destruction that COVID has wrought, you actually are going to get an incredible wave of entrepreneurial energy as people build something new business models, new businesses. I mean, people, they only have two choices. They just kind of say, oh, well, I'll become a ward of the state, which doesn't work so well in the US, works better in Europe. Or you say, start again. And I think when those people start again, they're going to build better business models. And if I had to name a sound for the world economy right now, it's the sound of a Formula One race when all the engines are revving, but right before the flag goes up. Like people are busy building cool new businesses. It's just you don't know about it because the press won't write about it for like 3 years. So I think we're about to have a takeoff that's stronger than most people expect. And that's what I would say to them is you want to encourage that.
You're spot on. And I want to repeat, you were spot on because nobody's talking really about the positive rise of Robinhood, the positive rise of stock slices, the massive growth of indexing. Because if you go on Reddit and you look at Wall Street Bets, these individuals are making money and they're investing them in local businesses. There was a gentleman like $100,000 on a trade. He invested in a local bakery. And so you're taking the cash you're getting from a stimulus or from this and you're reinvesting it. And then we're also seeing in the United States, the savings rates are going up. So now if you have, and the credit rate, so you have credit, you have savings, and you have the ability to invest, you're about to unleash an economic boom. On the backside of that, how long can the U.S. keep printing money?
Well, on that question, the answer is kind of forever because I don't know why, but they place a lot of confidence in the US dollar. They seem to be willing to buy it under any circumstances. The whole world is short of dollars. And let's face it, the US always recovers from downturns faster, sharper than anywhere else. People always bet it's going to be China, and it always turns out to be the US is the fastest. And I'll add to the picture, by the way, I think we're at the beginning of something as epic as the next industrial revolution. Technology, and particularly the digitization of the economy, is happening at such a pace. And in fact, even what we're doing on this podcast, right? We're on Squadcast. We can see each other. It's like a conversation. Everybody's in the Zoom revolution. So suddenly you can bring together disparate people and people you wouldn't have hired in the economy. It's a great equalizer. Now, many more people will have access to the workforce. And I think when you put those three things together, you are turbocharging the growth story we're going to have for the next decade. And that's similar to what happened in the 1920s after the Spanish flu and World War I. We had the 1920s, an epic period of growth. Now, okay, yes, that ended badly in the 30s, but we could avoid that mistake. We could avoid that.
I definitely think we can, and I'm really happy that you brought up the next industrial revolution because autonomous vehicles are getting to the point where they're getting closer to commercialization. Autonomous trucks are getting closer to commercialization. We had the FAA drone news. On the backside, I got to ask you about the policy and the economic impact where DJI is on the U.S. Department of Commerce's entity list, which basically banned them. Does this new emerging automation technology become a national security issue and a sense of pride for countries where American companies are afraid that China is going to continue to steal their IP and outmaneuver them?
Yeah. So look, we're in the new space race is for data. And governments are devoting an enormous amount of money to this, right? Defense spending is significantly on the rise, but nobody in the defense community feels like they're getting it because they're not spending it on aircraft carriers and tanks. They're spending it on supercomputers and quantum computers and the whole business of administering a war remotely and digitally. And so, yes, this will continue to be an issue. I'd put it a little differently, in fact, to say it used to be that war games. I mean, I've been an advisor to the Pentagon on war games over the years. That used to be about, military personnel and fighter jets. Now it's about TikTok. It's about literally Minecraft, children's games. How do we go from war games to children's games? Answer, it's all about data gathering. That's the new reconnaissance from a military point of view. And so control over data flows, access to data flows, this is the highest priority.
How much that goes into trying to control emotions?
Oh, so I think a lot, and I've written a lot about this. So one of the companies that's been banned by the US is SenseTime, a Chinese company which is particularly expert in facial recognition. Most people think that's like identifying, oh, that's Pippa Malmgren, that's her face. No, it's about identifying my emotional reactions to things. So when I watch a movie, how do I emotionally react? Or when I walk through a grocery store, because if you know how I emotionally react, then you know, A, how to sell to me, but you also know how to negotiate with me. And so facial recognition is really about deep insight into your thought process that even you don't know. I know a friend who runs a luxury goods company, and she was saying that when people walk in the shop, they'll say they're there to buy a pair of earrings, but they already know from how they're looking at stuff that they're going to buy a handbag. In other words, the digital space, you have a digital twin, and that's what's being assessed, and it knows you better than you know yourself.
What if that technology got into the wrong hands and ended up in the vehicles around the world and you're gathering all of that data? That just seems like it's going to open up a whole new world of private conversations. How are you handling an adverse situation if I cut you off? Could be used, I'll be very frank with you, it could be weaponized.
Well, yeah, I'd go further than that. Imagine that you're in a car accident and the authorities can now gather all the data from the 48 hours beforehand, and they can see how much were you drinking, how much did you order in the bar the night before, that you were arguing with your spouse the 2 seconds before the accident happened. I mean, we're living in a world where we're giving off data, or data is being gathered about us from every angle all the time. Now, some of it is good because you're going to be able to cure diseases and reduce the risk of accidents and all sorts of good things. But at the same time, I'm concerned about this concept. It's called surveillance capitalism. And we do it in the West. The Chinese are doing it. They're doing it more overtly for controlling opinions and controlling who gets to meet together and who doesn't. And basically, if you start having the wrong opinion and meeting with the wrong people, suddenly you try to get an airplane ticket and the system won't let you buy one. Right. So these are ethical issues that are tied to automated processes. And I think we need to put a lot more thought into it. A lot more thought.
Will we possibly see at some point in the future a consumer privacy bill for when you're in a fully automated vehicle that's operated by a third-party operator, that you clearly have a set of privacy that the government put through?
Well, I think we can try, but I think more and more, what you say anywhere, whether it's in your car or over your phone or in a public space, all this can be easily captured and is already. So I think this is, again, where we need to really think through what kind of rules would actually protect people and create private spaces. When I worked in the White House, one of the issues I worked on was terrorism risks to the economy in the aftermath of 9/11 and on the Patriot Act. And of course, you want to have the ability to identify bad guys doing bad things before they do it. But on the other hand, you don't want to create a world where no one can have a conversation that isn't being judged by an algorithm in some way. And, I think there's back in the 60s, there was a lot of thinking about this, and that you need to create some spaces where people can be free to just say stuff and say what they think. And you want that because we need diversity of thinking, we need a place where we can like play with ideas. I'm not saying I'm in support of, the kind of free speech that says there's a fire in the building, but where people don't feel like everything they say is going to end up in an algorithm that's going to start deciding whether or not you're insurable.
You bring up a great point on insurable, which I want to get to in a minute, but the diversity of thinking, there's a buddy of mine, he's part of this book club. There's like 20 people in it, and everybody recommends a book. So it might be on fly fishing, it might be on nuclear science, and you read it and you talk about it. And it's you would topic that you would have never, fly fishing, I don't know anything about that. It's this really interesting, safe way to learn about new topics. When you talk about privacy, and we kind of dial in COVID, I am terrified that there is going to be some sort of digital wallet that will follow you everywhere, where you will have to show your data and they will know everything about you. Is that, and we saw the stuff that got leaked from Clear, what they're trying to do, is that going to come forward and be a big issue in the future?
Well, a lot of smart people are working on the opposite. Sir Tim Berners-Lee, who is considered the father of the internet, is one of them. But there are a bunch of them. And what they're trying to do is create a system where your data can be accessed by, say, your medical physician, but they can't take it with them. So they can verify because you've given them permission to verify, and then they know, okay, you are who you are and your data is there. But basically your data stays with you. And I think that we're probably moving in that direction. Now, that's not where the big data gathering companies are, right? Google obviously will be on the other side of that argument. But I think the demand for that privacy and control of data is really accelerating as people realize that if you're not paying for it, you are the product.
That's a valid point. And what really concerns me is this data sharing that's only going to continue, because on January 17, 2021, the Los Angeles Times headline read, "Make America California Again." That's Biden's plan. And the author of that article stated, "California is the incubator of innovation, the premier laboratory of democracy, the land of big ideas." While once true, today California is an economic shambles. People are leaving. Companies are every day ruining individuals' privacy for their own gain, not for the good of society. If this translates to a national U.S. policy, we're in a lot of trouble.
So let me say something I think will be very controversial, and we'll probably get some love mail and some hate mail. And that is to say that I don't think that Silicon Valley is the epicenter of innovation any longer. And it's not that I can make the argument they took a wrong road, but I think they're still doing some amazing work there. What I do think is, in a world where technology has facilitated communication and creation to such an extent, it's happening everywhere. There's innovation all over the United States. And if I had to name the epicenter of it today, I would say it's Austin. It's not Silicon Valley anymore. And the movement of people from the coastlines into the interior of the United States is happening really rapidly. And cities like Nashville are suddenly becoming major work centers where you can have a great quality of life and do amazing work. So that means we're going to get new investment models. It's not all going to be controlled by this handful of people who happen to have been very successful over the last few decades in Silicon Valley. And by the way, there's a whole world out there. And I think we're going to see more internationalization of innovation. I'm currently working on building a business where my team is already global. Like, we're just a tiny startup and the people are literally in, I think 6 countries.
So that's what digitization can allow you to do. And on the tail side of what you mentioned about Silicon Valley no longer being the epicenter is business owners are tired of regulation. Another thing is they're getting older. They're having families. They want to send their children to school. They don't want to have a pool in the backyard. They want to enjoy a quality of life. They don't want to walk down the street and see somebody do something inappropriate that they have to explain to their children. And all California wants to do is regulate, regulate, regulate. You have a business, Pippa? Oh, I'm going to regulate you out of business because I don't agree with you. America is done being censored. The world is done being censored. And you have the leadership of Governor Abbott, which started under Governor Perry in Texas. It's booming. And then in Florida, you have Governor DeSantis is just opening up the welcome wagon in Miami for tech. And you're completely right. It's moving all over all over the country and all over the world. And I have to ask you, Jack Ma's missing. Don't care what any reporter says, he's missing. If that turns into a situation with the Dali and Wanda guy and whatever might happen, does the world stand up and say one of the most successful entrepreneurs said something inappropriately and now he's gone forever? That might happen to me. And then we have a global pushback.
So China's had quite a long history of taking successful entrepreneurs into custody and charging them with having violated the law in some way. And it's really accelerated in the last 5 years. I took notice of it maybe 5 years ago, and it was the beginning of a kind of crackdown on anyone with an alternative opinion. And the problem is, for the Chinese leadership, in my judgment, they can't expect the public to keep, being entrepreneurial and building cool businesses if they start to believe that if you're really, really successful, you're going to end up basically arrested and the government's going to take everything from you. But that's the kind of feeling that's developing. And the international community is looking at China going, do I really want to do business in China? I mean, as a person who's served the president, occasionally do I say things in social media that might be critical of the Chinese? Yes. I mean, I occasionally say things that are critical of a lot of different nations. But is that enough to warrant me being detained in China these days? It's possible. So suddenly the risk reward is very different. And I do think that China is not presenting itself as a rewarding place to do business in the way that it used to.
Because do we see an exodus of capital that's outside of the luxury companies will still continue to do business, the tourism, hospitality companies still do business, but a lot of this, the tech money, the investors will pull out of there, maybe put some money in Hong Kong or go down into Australia and New Zealand and say, you know what, it's not worth the risk because one day we can wake up and everything can be taken from us?
I think that's already begun. And of course, the Trump administration super accelerated that by forcing U.S. investors to pull out of investments in China that were deemed to be a strategic security risk to the United States. And of course, that's a hugely controversial issue. But I think even without that a lot of them were doing it anyway, because the promise in China was always that you were going to make a ton of money. But actually, very few people really made money in China. What's also interesting is that your ability to make money is expanded now. And I'll give you my new definition of globalization, because the old definition was basically China was the cheapest place to make everything, so all the jobs went to China. But now you can make stuff pretty cheaply almost anywhere. And the US, in fact, is turning into a huge manufacturing center, not because of Donald Trump. I think it started before Trump, but because the US is just so efficient and the human labor component of any manufactured good is falling to such a small amount. And what matters more is your ability to deploy the software and the technology well. So actually, the new globalization is what I might call, I had to make up a word for it, is glocalization. And it's like you're globalizing the localization of business. And actually, that means everybody's going to get some of the jobs everywhere, which may be a better deal.
You're right about being a better deal. I want to pivot back here to the U.S. for a minute because Apple's manufacturing some of the high-end Apple computers in Texas.
Yeah,
Louis Vuitton Moet Hennessy has an incredible Louis Vuitton factory that they're making them here in America, and they're putting that Made in America seal, which in America can get you a large premium. And the thing that Mr. Arnault should get more credit for is that he brought back apprenticeships where they're taking these individuals in the local communities and they're training them how to be leather workers. And it's an incredible company. And the big thing that Mr. Arnault is doing right, there's a path to scale and a path to becoming extremely wealthy. It's not just you're an apprentice, you're going to build bags your whole life. No, you can move your way up into management. And Mr. Arnault's done a really great job in that. And we're going to continue to see more companies and bring back their manufacturing to the United States.
Can I just say, this is such a big deal, and it's a trend I've seen over the last 5 years. I was talking with the head of one of the largest automotive car parts manufacturers in the United States, And she said, we are hiring 18-year-olds straight out of high school. And the biggest obstacle are the parents and the career counselors who say, oh, no, you don't want to work in manufacturing because they've got some Victorian notion in their mind. So she said, I got to hire these buses, bring the parents and the kids to our factory, which is, of course, as pristine as a modern surgical room. And suddenly they realize, manufacturing isn't like what I thought it was. And I think it's a return to the 1950s model where you're building the skill sets from people who are bright and wonderfully no longer requiring that they had to get through certain hoops, like have to go to university, because there are a lot of bright people who, through no fault of their own, don't have the resources to go to university. That doesn't mean that they aren't immensely capable and productive.
You're right. There's another company based out of Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, started by Pete Render and Brian Selesky, Argo AI, with the majority of investors of Ford and VW. And when you talk to Brian, he wants to hire kids out of high school and put them into an apprentice program. And he wants diversified backgrounds. Can you use tools? Can you work in a wood shop? Okay, you're qualified. We can help you understand all the little nuances. Because when you look at autonomy and you look at automation, I have this saying that there's all these going to be non-sexy jobs. You're going to need somebody to refuel them, to clean them, to do the route planning. That's not going to be automated. So it's going to create all these jobs on the backside. Everybody's like, oh, automation is the boogeyman. No, automation is going to create jobs, not just in the United States, but globally.
Definitely. This is one of the biggest misconceptions. So the first truly robotic tool that was ever introduced was called the Jacquard weaving loom in 1804. And it was for making fabric. And we've had nothing but more robotics and more automation of robotics since that time. Now, just before COVID happened, I look around the world as the Economist, and what do I see? Record employment in the United States, record employment in China, record employment pretty much everywhere. So you cannot say that automation equals unemployment, because it's just not true. Automation equals better employment, more interesting jobs, less dangerous, less dirty, less dull. And I'll finish by saying, I've been in the drone space for the last few years, and I'll tell you the sexiest job in drones is the welding, it is the wiring, it is the making. Give me the guys who are motorcycle mechanics any day, because they know how to make stuff work. And let's not forget that Albert Einstein spent his weekends working in his uncle's repair shop, where he was pulling apart electrical devices and making crystal set radios and working on real things. That's where you learn physics. So I'm all for the real economy, people.
No, you're right. And when you're building real things, one of the fastest growing global markets now is semiconductors is booming, but it's going through consolidation, which raises the geopolitical issue. Taiwan Semiconductors is a $500 billion company now, absolutely booming. They're building Apple's M1 chip. Reuters and other global outlets have reported that they're going to build the chips for Apple's self-driving car. There's other reports from Wall Street Journal and the Financial Times that they're building chips for other individual self-driving cars. If Taiwan Semiconductor becomes a $1 trillion company with the majority market share of supplying chips to self-driving cars, does that become a geopolitical issue with China? Now, wait a second. Taiwan's now controlling this market. We're not?
It already is. It already is. Because, again, the Trump administration stepped in to effectively say that the Taiwanese shouldn't be selling those chips to the Chinese. And that was a real wrench in the political arrangement between China and Taiwan. Because I know the popular story is China and Taiwan are enemies, but the reality is, and I used to live in Hong Kong, I spent a lot of time in China, and the reality is that the whole Taiwanese economy is completely integrated into the Chinese economy. It's highly cohesive, a bit like Mexico and the United States are effectively one supply chain. So for the Taiwanese to stop selling those chips to the Chinese is a real problem. And then the question is, can the Chinese learn to build them themselves? And that's an open question. That's an open question.
You're right about building themselves. That's going to be really interesting. You see these press releases about the autonomous vehicles going around Shanghai or going around Beijing. But it's really interesting. They're not here. There was companies here One company got in trouble to remain anonymous, and they were renting this incredible house. It must have been 35,000 square feet, right in Cupertino, right near Apple's headquarters. And I got a phone call from some individuals that you probably know and said, okay, leave your cell phone in the car. Like, don't have any stuff in there. And it was a whole operation to gather data to take it back to China. And that was spooky.
Well, like I said, this is the new battleground from a military perspective. It's for data rather than for territory. And, people who work, for example, in law firms and investment banks, they never think that they're targets for this sort of thing. But who knows more about the condition of a particular company or whether a deal is going to happen or not? It's those guys. So are their phones targeted? Sure, absolutely. And I'm always like, guys, you got to pay attention to this. Like, what? Us? We're just the lawyers. I'm like, you know all the inside skinny. And data is how this is, like I said, this is the new war zone.
You're right about this, and you've been on the record in several publications talking about how you like to connect the dots and you see patterns. What new patterns do you see emerging globally over the next 4 years?
Oh, so many. Well, what I've said is if you're looking at data, as in graphs and charts, then you're by definition looking back at history. And I suggest that if you want to look forward, you look for signals. And signals are anecdotes, hints that aren't yet clear in the data. And I see a lot of signals that the future is going to be better. I do see people adopting technology much more readily. I do see people are being able to build extraordinary businesses with far fewer resources, less need for cash. I think that everybody assumes you need a lot of money to build a business, but Jeff Bezos at Amazon always said his best performing divisions are the ones that have the least cash, because then they have to use imagination. And I think imagination is a more important business skill than analytical skills in this environment where the rules of the game itself are changing. Like, it's one thing when you know the lay of the land, but right now we're in a moment of history where every rule is being challenged by reality. So I wouldn't underestimate the capacity for humans to innovate, create, anticipate. And I'll maybe finish giving you a funky example that I like, because you never think about art as being important in the economy, but artists are the radar of the economy. They tell you what's coming. They pick the cheapest cool part of town before it becomes the place you want to be investing, like, I don't know, the meatpacking district in New York. I remember a few years ago in 2018, the Paris fashion shows, Prada and others started showing riot gear on the catwalk. And I remember as an economist going, well, we have the conditions for protest, and now the designers are showing us what to wear. And I'm like, we're going to have protests. And sure enough, 24 months later, you got protests.
I love that analogy because artists and designers, they're tapped into culture. They see things before other individuals see things. And I'll give you another example for the listeners is the growth of the Supreme brand before VF acquired it. That was a whole underground movement that mainstream nobody ever picked on until the gentleman sold all those shirts at Sotheby's for millions of dollars. Like, wait a second. Well, this has been going on for years. They're ahead of it because they have their ears to the ground. They're listening, they're talking, they're experiencing things. They're not sitting in an office all day, They're out there doing things.
Exactly. And that's, even the term mainstream is really interesting because it implies it's like the Colorado River or something. But actually, what is mainstream is what we now call underground. But it's not underground to people who are involved in it. It's perfectly obvious that it's going on. So it's the people who are disconnected who call it underground.
But it's those that are connected, that are finding the trends, are going to build the businesses of the future. In 5 and 10 years from now, you and I will be talking like, you remember that conversation? These kids went on to build incredible businesses, to have an incredible economic impact, to support their communities and create jobs. And Pippa, as we look to wrap up this insightful conversation, I'd like to ask you, what would you like our listeners to take away with them?
I think they should take away this optimism, this willingness to look around and instead of being overwhelmed by all the dark negative stories, that there's always upside, even when the story is dark. Like, for example, right now, obviously, we got this situation in the United States where 70 million Americans support Donald Trump. And he may be leaving the White House, but Trumpism is not going away. Now, that can look like a very difficult challenge, or actually, it could be the beginning of an interesting opportunity to create something that's more integrating. And I just think, yes, it's a hard task, but every single hard task is usually followed by, well, we're better now. It's a better off situation. So we shouldn't just assume that it's all dark and downside. I see nothing but upside in front of us, even when it's difficult.
And the future's bright, the future's autonomous, and the new space race is data. And Pippa, thank you so much for coming on here and sharing your incredible economic insights with us today.
Thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Thank you for listening to the Road to Autonomy podcast. If you've enjoyed listening, please rate, review, and subscribe on your favorite podcast platform. Want to get in touch? Follow us on Twitter @Road to Autonomy or email podcast@brulteco.com. The Road to Autonomy is produced by Brulte & Company. The views and opinions expressed on the Road to Autonomy podcast do not necessarily reflect the views and opinions of Brulte & Company. The content discussed on this podcast is for informational purposes only and should not be taken as legal, tax, investment, or business advice.